Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake lie or imagination. Sattology actually builds your identity, whereas mythology destroys your identity. When you say Sattology, you're actually saying that your history is real, is truthful, and it can be used mostly in the Western context or the anglicized Indian context because mythology is a word which actually in the English connotation means with no substantial proof or not real, imaginary or fake. So please don't call Ramayana, Mahabharata and your own Puranic history and Vedic history as mythology. The real mythologies are coming from the Brahmism based cultures. I have a very special guest today. He has written a book on Mahabharata, and it is always welcome. I always welcome people who write on Mahabharata because it is the only book of culture present in the world. It's not a book of war. If somebody says that Mahabharata is a book of war, that means probably he never understood what is the word Mahabharata even mean. So with that, I'm going to invite Sri Abhinav Agarwal. Welcome to the show.
Namaskar, Namaskar. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
So, so the number one question, because so many books on Mahabharata have come out, and I love your shirt actually, by the way. We got Harinam on it, and you dress for the occasion. So when we hear about Mahabharata, what inspired you to write on Mahabharata?
See, first of all, I think the Mahabharata is a collection of so many different stories in themselves. Everyone grows up reading or hearing about the Mahabharata in one way or the other, and the story itself is so engrossing, inspiring that I think we all want to retell a part of it. We all want to make the Mahabharata our own, and share the joy that we have about the Mahabharata with others. And I'm no different. I wanted to share my passion for the Mahabharata with others, and that was the fundamental reason behind starting to write about the Mahabharata. Of course, one of the things that I did want to do was try and write about something that had not been written before, which is, if you look at it, it's a somewhat difficult task because people have been writing about the Mahabharata for thousands of years, literally thousands of years, and there are any number of characters about which people have written, from Yudhishthir and Krishna and Arjun and Bhim and Duryodhan and Karn and Draupadi and Rukmini. People have written about almost every single character in the Mahabharata. So I wanted to make my book slightly different. And one of the things that then struck me was that there are these Upakathas, Upakhyanas in the Mahabharata that have not really been written about much, or at least not all of the Upakhyanas. So that is what got me started on this book.
So you mentioned about 67 stories, compelling stories in different parts. So when we see Mahabharata, then generally in Mahabharata, the stories are presented as Itihas is the actual word as it happened, and also sometimes different rishi munis are presenting from the past also what happened where. And like Pulastya Rishi will tell his story about visiting different places, and Dhamma Rishi is going to tell his stories about examples, and Kanak will give his own examples with Dhritarashtra. And multiple stories are going on. But the central theme of Mahabharata is the Vedic message being transmitted from the stories. So that people's character comes up, people's personality comes up. Like, for example, somebody may ask that why we should not have more than three children. Or so then the conversation of Kunti and Madri comes in with Pandu. You know, so immediately. So whenever there is a dharmic question, there is a solution coming in. Even when Yudhishthir was getting married, five brothers were getting married to Draupadi, there was a huge discussion. Drishtimna was not agreeing, Drupad was not agreeing. Vyasdev had to come in, and Vyasdev had to ask Yudhishthir, do you see any reference before? Has it happened before? And he explains there's a reference. So again, people go back to the reference. It's like going back to the law book, that without a reference, there is no happening. So tell me, when you connect these stories, so now how do you justify the messages being sent?
So, see, one of the at the core, yes, the Mahabharata is about the is an account, the Itihasa as it happened, is an account of the Kuru cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. But ultimately, it is also a story about India. It is also a story about what is happening had happened before also. And this is something that comes out very, very starkly and nicely in the Aranyak Parv, where the Pandavas are spending 12 years in exile, and then the 13th year they will have to spend in Agyatwas. And Yudhishthir asks the sages there, he asked Brihadashva, he asked Markandeya, he asks other sages that is there anyone as unfortunate as I am? Is there anyone who has suffered more than me? Is there anyone who has had to undergo more sufferings than Draupadi? He asks these questions. He wants to understand why what has happened to me has happened. And then sages come and they tell him that what has happened to you had happened earlier also. So the message is that the Mahabharata is telling us that this is Kal Chakra. What had happened is happening and will happen again in different yugas, and a different dharma perhaps may need to be followed. So take for example, right at the very start of their vanvas, when the Pandavas have just started, Yudhishthir asks, "Is there anyone as unfortunate as I am?" And then a sage comes there, Sage Brihadashva, and he tells him that yes, there has been someone as unfortunate as you, perhaps even more so. And Yudhishthir says, how is that possible? So he says, let me tell you about the life and the times of Nal and Damayanti. And that's when we learn that just as Yudhishthir had lost his kingdom in a game of dice, so had Nal. Yudhishthir had lost all his riches, his kingdom, so had Nal. But on the other hand, Nal even ended up losing his wife. The two, Nal and Damayanti, were separated for several years till they were reunited again. But they had been separated. At least the Pandavas and Yudhishthir was not separated from his wife. Nal had even ended up losing the last stitch of clothing on him. At least this did not happen with the Pandavas. So Brihadashva explains all of this to him. Or towards the end of the 12-year period of exile, when Draupadi is abducted by Jayadratha, Yudhishthir is again plunged into grief. How is it that this is happening again and again? Is there anyone who has suffered more? And then he's told the story of Rama in the Upakhyana. Everything that had happened had a reason behind it. Why was Vidur born from dharma from Yama and yet never became king? So you go to the Animandava Upakhyana to learn that. How is it that a warrior like Bhishma that even Parshuram could not defeat ends up being killed at the hands of someone who was a woman, who was born a woman, who had been a woman in a previous life? And this is something that Bhishma himself explains and tells to Duryodhana and the Kauravas right before the war is about to begin in the Ambopakyan. So, like this, the messages of the Mahabharata are amazing. What had happened is happening and will happen again to different people. The circumstances might change, but the underlying message does not. So, bringing out these stories was something that just fascinated me.
No, very wonderful. You connected many things. Like I'm really inspired by the story of Bhagwan Ram in Valmiki Ramayana. It's a, and there are four times the Ramayana is quoted in Mahabharata. Four times. People don't know. Four times. Different people have quoted it. Narad Muni quotes it, and different people quote it. Even Duryodhan quotes Ramayana example that Arjuna has gone to Shaloba, which is Mahabharata is called Shadoba. It's called Shaloba in Valmiki Ramayana, and he has crossed that, and he explained Dhritarashtra. How can we fight with him? He says. So the generally now I'll ask you in the today's context, people generally there are a lot of mythologists. We won't take anybody's name. There is one leading mythologist also, and many mythologists they claim these stories as mere stories, and in fact the places are mentioned where these stories happened and which place this happened, which mountain was near, which river was near, and how did they perform tarpan or devata puja before they did something. Now, most of these, the modern people, modern so-called historians, call it a mythology. And in your study of Mahabharata, you will not find, the one famous English politician said, I'll say English, not British, because English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish are four different communities, four different nations. So the English politician said that even a line of Shakespeare is higher than anything Vedic ever written. That's what he said. But today's you see in India and also other countries. I mean, I don't blame other countries because other countries are using Mahabharata to come to India. So they have to quote from Mahabharata and they have to do research on Mahabharata to gain some kind of acceptability with India to gain some business in India. But the Indian origin people calling it a mythology or mere stories, how far you justify that?
See, the reality is that 75 years after independence, we are still mentally colonized. We still use the terms, the phrases that were invented during colonization to colonize and keep the Indian people colonized. And 75 years later, we still are using those same terms and phrases, mythology being one of them. And we are told that these are just stories that were invented and there is no historical basis behind it, which in the last 100 years or so, enough evidence has come out to prove that these are not mere stories, but they had a factual basis in them. Now, what the Mahabharata talks about, for instance, refers to places that existed. It describes places that existed. Now, in the telling of the Mahabharata, yes, there is some amount of creative artistic liberty that has been taken, which is taken with almost any historical account. Does it mean that if, for example, you say that 1 billion people died in the Kurukshetra war, does it really mean that exactly 1 billion people died? Perhaps not. It is a, it is basically a very large number used to signify that there was a great number of people that were killed in that war. Let's take another example, Dwarka, right? For the longest time, it was said that the sinking of Dwarka and all that is a complete mythology. Well, what happened in 1985? So the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, the late Shri S.R. Rao, he got funding and he conducted over the next 4 years what was India's first marine excavation, India's very first marine excavation. And Sri S.R. Rao was very well versed in the Mahabharata itself, and he had read the shlokas and he had read the parvas which described how Dwarka or a part of Dwarka was claimed for expanding the city. So when the Yadavs moved there, when Krishna moved, persuaded the Yadavs, the Vrishnis, the Andhaks to move from Mathura to Dwarka, they realized that the existing land was not enough to accommodate everyone that was there. So what did they do? They prayed and a certain amount of land was made available, and then they built Dwarka on that piece of land. And we are also told that 36 years after the war, because of Gandhari's curse, the all the Vrishnis, the Andhaks, the Yadavs, they ended up killing each other near Prabhas, which is near Somnath, and the ocean reclaimed what it had provided. right? So this was all mentioned in the Mahabharata, and this was all dismissed as mythology, as fantastical and all. But guess what? In 1985 through 1989, when Sri S.R. Rao did his marine excavations, they found a submerged city. They found anchors, they found piers, they found doors, they found basically they found land that had been reclaimed, but about 3,500 years ago, or thereabouts, maybe 4,000, maybe 3,500 years ago. That piece of land had been submerged because the water levels had risen, and that land had been again submerged under the ocean, which followed exactly what had been mentioned in the Mahabharata. Now, if you're a reasonable person, if you're a logical person, if you believe in evidence, your first instinct, your first reaction will be to say that the geography described in the Mahabharata with respect to Dwarka is actually based in fact. But this was dismissed, or see, actually, you could not dismiss the scientific evidence that was put forward. So, what happened? What was the next ploy adopted? So there's a respected Indologist lady in the US, very well respected Indologist. So she wrote a book describing Hinduism in very sympathetic terms, so by and large. But her overall agenda was to reduce Hinduism down to only the faith that is practiced by the people, not based in fact or in history. Okay, so when talking about these marine excavations, she wrote that, and I'm quoting from memory here, so I'm paraphrasing. She said that irrespective of what was found or not found at Dwarka, the sacredness of Dwarka comes from the faith and the belief of the people there. Okay, and then a few chapters later, she talks about Ayodhya. And Ayodhya, she says that there is little evidence that this is the Ayodhya of Rama, and she says that she quotes Hans Bakker as saying that Ayodhya was a very sleepy town and all that. But guess what happened around the same time that she wrote the book? The judgment of the Supreme Court of the Allahabad High Court came out, running into 6-7,000 pages. It included the report of the Archaeological Survey of India, which was conducted in the presence of both parties who had filed suit. Every single step was followed meticulously. Every single item that was discovered during the excavations was catalogued, photographed in the presence of both parties, and it was kept in a storeroom. Ground penetrating radar was used to figure out where to dig the trenches. So, how does she refer to this? Oh, something was done under blue trenches. That is all that was used to dismiss the excavations at Ayodhya. So, coming back to my point, that what we have been taught is that the history of India, the history of its religion and geography that is written, that is to be believed, is one that is written by outsiders. We Indians are not seen capable enough, reliable enough to write about our own faith. So when you read the works of Sri S.R. Rao, when you read the works of the late Padma Vibhushan, then you Sri B.B. Lal, that is when you learn that there is so much about the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, that is based in geography and fact, but which has been either suppressed or dismissed. If you write anything about that is sympathetic towards, that is in favor of Hinduism, that is dismissed as propaganda. And we are told and we are taught that to speak about facts with respect to Hinduism, to talk about our culture and faith is we should be we should not talk about it. We should be sort of ashamed about it. And this is the part of colonization that has seeped in so deeply that it exists even to this day.
You mentioned very rightly about the colonization inside the culture, and but you also mentioned something else also. So in the conversation, the answer that you're saying, you're talking about the universities, and you mentioned the name of B.V. Lal. I had a good fortune of meeting B.V. Lal a couple of years back before. and also his and other Nagarjuna, Professor Nagarjuna also. And so most of these people, they never claimed that Mahabharata was ever. They had differences on the age. When did this happen? That is acceptable. That is acceptable. But not a single one of them said it didn't happen. But nowadays, you see, the bigger propaganda is that it never happened. And it's like somebody coming to America and saying they discovered USA, and we are living in USA here. Uh, and they said discovered USA, but there were Native Americans already living there. So they discovered USA, which was already inhabited largely, almost 100 million Native Americans. And the whole story was done to displace them. And nowadays, in the American textbooks, very fleeting references of Native Americans is made and usually shown them as barbaric, just like what is happening to Hindus in India. That Hindus are shown as barbarians. All human rights abuses are connected to Hindus, and everything negative is connected to Hindus. A European word caste is supposed to be on Hindus. It's no connection with India. It's a European word. And so it's like they're trying to hide their dirty laundry. And then they put aspersions on other people. But if you when you go to Mahabharata, you learn how to defend your own land, how to defend your own culture, what are the duties for every citizen, not even just army, duties of every citizen, duties of family members, duties of so the very not an enlightenment culture. Like if you enlightenment, I'm saying entitlement culture. And but if you go to the West, if you see, it's a whole lot of human rights have become the entitlement culture. I should get a paycheck of $1,500 a month, even though I don't work, because I deserve to get it. It's my right to get it, human rights to get it. But if you look at the native cultures all over the world, whether it's, I consider Hindus as the natives of the land of Bharat, and which is a large land. No, not today. The entire Asia is talked about in Mahabharata. And Mahabharata talks about China giving taxes to India. Hastinapur, twice, four references actually. And so now with this background, how do you justify that the somebody else trying to tell you in Mahabharata what it is not? And some of the Indian universities collaborating with them and saying and inviting them to speak on these topics. And people like yourself who are trying to present the truth and like a Sattology to the audience, to the people, your readers. So how do you answer that challenge? Because you're fighting against a whole system, and your book is maybe many of them, many books. In fact, many of the mythologists' book on Mahabharata got sold more. There are a lot of stories, 1,000 days of war, 1,018 days of war. There's so many books filled up, mostly garbage. Tell me, please.
See, so there are three things here, right? The first one is that it is a reflection again, as I said, and I'll keep coming back to the word colonization. We still are colonized, despite whatever people might say that we have been decolonized and all of that, and there's a resurgence. The fact is that for the most part, we still remain colonized, and part of the reason is that our history has been taught to us by outsiders. Outsiders had no interest in teaching us our history in a true or authentic manner. Their reason behind teaching us and writing our history was to make sure that we stayed colonized. Because of people who are ashamed of their own past, who are ashamed of what they are, who are ashamed of their identity, are much easier to subjugate and rule. This was the entire purpose behind the colonists writing our history. Now, it is one thing to keep blaming them that they did this, they did this. Yes, they did all of this because they thought that this is what they had to do to preserve their hold, their power, their political and military power over India. But we did become free. We did gain political independence in 1947. What stopped us from decolonizing ourselves? And the answer is that our leaders continued to be mentally colonized. They liked saying all the right words and everything, but deep down inside, they were not proud of India. And that continue. And see, what their ideology was, what their thinking was, what their mental colonization was, that is what percolated down to the universities also. And a lot of this role was, and a lot of the blame for this has to go to Jawaharlal Nehru University, which was set up by Mrs. Indira Gandhi as one of the conditions for the communists to extend support to her after she broke the Congress into two to consolidate her power. And once that happened, communists took over the JNU, and they made sure that only people who were true to their ideology were appointed in positions. They made sure that the Ministry of Education was run by their people. They made sure that only scholars who towed their ideological line got tenureship, who got funding for projects. So, over a period of several decades, this is what happened. But my question is, and it continues to be, that what stopped us from decolonizing 10, 20 years back? Nothing of that sort happened. The syllabus that we continue to teach to our students is the syllabus that was written by urban naxals. What stopped us from changing it? Obviously, we don't see, or our leadership doesn't see anything wrong in the education syllabus that was created by communists and urban naxals. So the fault at this point, historically speaking, yes, it is the fault of the colonists. But today, if we are where we are, that fault lies entirely with us. There's no point in looking outward and blaming other people. If we ourselves are unable, unwilling to change, then why blame others? Change has to come from within. And these distortions in our epics, like take the Mahabharata for instance. One writer writes that Uttarayan has to do with the waxing and waning phases of the moon. Now this is garbage. This is garbage, and yet the writer gets away with it because he relies on the ignorance of Indians reading their own epics. No one stands up and says, what you have written is rubbish. Uttarayan has got nothing to do with the moon. But we don't challenge that, so he gets away with it. There's another very famous Indologist who writes that most of India is in the northern hemisphere. Now, in the third standard, a student learns that all of India is in the northern hemisphere. Kanyakumari is roughly 900 kilometers north of the equator. The southernmost point in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which is the southernmost point of India, is still a few hundred kilometers north of the equator. And yet this writer writes that most of India is in the northern hemisphere. The publisher doesn't see anything wrong with it. It is not fact checked. When the book comes out in an updated edition, that line is still included word for word. Why don't we challenge that? And the few people who do, they are dismissed as Sanghis, as Hinduttvadis, as extremists, as trolls. So it is kind of ironical that people, academics sitting in Western academia, are so scared of an open debate. But that is not surprising, right? That is not surprising. If you're writing garbage, you don't want to go out in the world and have a debate with people who are willing to call you out on the rubbish that you're writing. Another author writes that the original Jaya that was what Vyasa composed was completely different from what has been written in the Mahabharata. The original Jaya was actually a very sympathetic tale towards the Kauravas. Well, where is this Jaya? What is this Jaya that this person claims to have read? 200 years of German Indology, Western Indology has not been able to find out what this Jaya is, and yet this writer writes confidently that I have read Jaya. What is this Jaya? Where is it? People don't challenge him on that. So I'm ranting here, but the point is that we don't have anyone to blame for this except ourselves. We are happy to be in this state of ignorance. Fine, it is our choice to remain in the state of ignorance, but that doesn't mean that others are not going to come and take advantage of this.
So, like the first shloka is Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. And then, so this prayer is said by Vaishampayan actually. And Vaishampayan is talking about Saraswati, Vyasa, and Jaya means actually histories because that's why we say Jai, anything, because it is referred to as glorified in the history. It makes it deeper. So 96,000 something shlokas are written, 96,000 in 18 parva, total around approximately 100,000. Approximately. I mean, this is what we are visible to us. And the out of which there is a controversy people create. 8,800 are the only real shlokas of Jaya, which is totally not correct. Vyasdev says 8,800 is difficult for anyone to understand except me, Shukadev Goswami, Ganesh, or probably Sanjay, because Sanjay was also his disciple. So anyway, this is a this is the again academic discussions for some people, but the information about Mahabharata is written in Mahabharata itself. So people don't have to look outside. They can read it. Gita Press has done a wonderful work. People should buy from there, and they have tried to compile every single version available. And there is another one in Pune also. There's another publishing house. You can get that copy also. But Gita Press is supposed to be the most complete one because they included the other part also. Anyway, so my last question to you in this discussion is, so in this completing Vyasa's story, like the title of the book is completing Vyasa's Mahabharata. So why do you give completing Vyasa's Mahabharata? Because it's supposed to be complete in any way.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a very good point. So there is some amount of ambiguity that might arise that people might say that, what are you trying to do? Vyasa's Mahabharata is complete. And my point is simply this. Vyasa's Mahabharata is incomplete without these Upakyanas. These Upakyanas complete Vyasa's Mahabharata. They are not a later edition. They are not an interpolation. There is the Mahabharata cannot be understood. It cannot be considered to be complete without these subtales, upakathas, upakhyanas. So these 67 upakhyanas are an integral part of the epic, is what I'm trying to say. For several reasons, they form without these upakhyanas, it becomes difficult to understand and appreciate the Mahabharata. When Vyasa wrote this Mahabharata, these Upakhyanas form part of it for a reason, that they help us understand so many of the episodes that happen in the Mahabharata. Right from, as you said earlier on, when Arjun wins the Draupadi Swayamvar, and then when Kunti says, share it among all of you, and they decide, and Yudhishthira decides that this means that all five Pandavas will marry Draupadi, and Dhrishtadyum and then Drupad say that how can that be? That has never been heard of before. And it indeed may be a surprise to people who may wonder why. That is when Vyasa comes and he takes Drupad into a room, because what he tells Drupad is only for Drupad's ears, and that's when he tells him the Upakhyana of Panchendra, that the Pandavas are nothing but the five Indras who were cursed by Shiva to be born as these Pandavas, and Draupadi is nothing but the incarnation of Shri. And they had and Indra had gone to Hari, to Narayan, to take his blessings and approval, and Shri agreed to be incarnated as Draupadi. So if you leave this Upakhyana out, then it leaves the that particular episode of the Mahabharata dangling. Or even if you go before, and you talked about the birth of the Pandavas. Pandu had been cursed by Rishi Kindam, so he could not father children, and yet you had the five Pandavas who were born. And when Pandu goes to Kunti and says that through another sage you can have children, and they will be considered my children, because according to Dharma, children, a son can be someone who is not only just a biological son but also someone that you rear and bring up and adopt. And Kunti refuses, and that is when the Upakhyana of Vyushatashva is recited. So, without these Upakyanas, the Mahabharata is not complete. So, anyone to say that these Upakyanas are not a part, they are an interpolation, they are a later edition, I don't think that is accurate to say. So, the title of my book is that these Upakyanas they complete the Mahabharata. So, Vyasa's Mahabharata is complete with these Upakyanas.
Many people they skip there's a delay here a little bit on the video. So, many people they say that the there are too many references, they get confused, and like you said, you have captured the middle part, Ukyana, where why this thing is happening. Like for example, the in the Swayamvar you mentioned just now, and Krishna tells Balram that who is which Pandav, and this is the first time they're seeing him after they're grown up. And then he explains that the tall one is Yudhishthir, the thin one is Yudhishthir, the mustaches, and this is Arjun, and this is Bhim, the tallest one. So these actually connect the dots. Why is important, and that's why Harivansha Puran also becomes very important, which is the last parva of Mahabharata also, where the supplementary, but it's a people include it in Harivansh Puran. In fact, in the 18th Parva, Harivansh is included. So, and you see the Harivansh tying very closely with Bhagavad Puran, because Bhagavad Puran and Harivansh have this very similar background information. And Shukdev Goswami is the one who repeats Bhagavad Puran. So it ties back. If that is not there, then you will not understand the why. Why is this happening? Because our culture is based on karma is like a bank balance. You do good things, you get deposited. It may not pay you immediately, some things yes, but not everything, and something is reserved for the future. So it uh, the philosophy of karma, philosophy of gyan, philosophy of tapasya, all these things are included in Mahabharata. So when you are explaining Upakhyan or the middle stories, how are you connecting with the other main stories which are actually giving messages to humanity?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't get that.
So when you're explaining,
The last part, the question.
yeah, when you're explaining the Upakhyan or the middle stories or why, then how are you connecting to the main messages of the main stories?
Oh, okay. So s- the first is that, see, the Upakyanas are not uniformly dispersed in the Mahabharata. Most of the Upakyanas, if you look at it, they're clustered in two or three parvas, in the Aranyak Parv, in the Shanti Parv, and the Anushasan Parv. So one thing that I did was when I start talking about an Upakyan, I connect the story from what has happened in the last Upakhyana to this Upakhyana, and I connect the events of the Mahabharata that have taken place. Because in some cases, there are entire parvas that don't contain a single Upakhyana. For instance, there is not a single Upakhyana in the Virat Parva. There is I think just one Upakhyana in the Bhishma Parva, which is the Ambopakhyan. And right from the very start, right from the point where you have to understand why was Bhishma born in this manner, you have to go to one of the very first Upakyanas, which tells you that why Ganga had to come down on earth to bear Bhishma and the Vasus. So the Mahabhish Upakhana tells you that if you don't if you don't read, if you don't consider the Mahabhish Upakhana, then Ganga's act of drowning the Vasus, the seven Vasus, is inexplicable. You read the Mahabhish Upakhana and you understand why that had to happen. Why was Vidur an incarnation of Dharma, and yet he had to be born the way he was to a maid, to Vedvyasa and a maid? For that, you have to read the Animandavya Upakhana. Why did the Pandavas marry The five Pandavas marry Draupadi, the Panchendra Upakhyana. Why was it that Arjun ended up, he was strong enough to kill Dronacharya, he was strong enough to kill and skilled enough to kill Karna, but he couldn't kill Bhishma. For that, you have to read the Ambopakyan tells us why. Or what was the message? There's actually one Upakhyana that Duryodhan recites, and he recites it to Shalya, which is the Tripuravad Upakhyana. And you might wonder how come Duryodhan is telling Shalya about Tripuravad. And to understand that, you have to read the Tripura Upakhyana, which actually tells you that the Duryodhan compared, he said that the world knows Karn to be a better archer than Arjun. And they think that you are a better charioteer than Krishna. So Duryodhan was playing on Shalya's ego to convince it. And who was when Shiva attacked and destroyed Tripura? Who was the charioteer of that chariot? It was Brahma. So to understand that yes, Yudhishthir had told Shalya that when the time comes, Karn will ask you to become his charioteer, and you play mind games to sap his morale and all that. But Shalya was also a king in his own right. How was he convinced to become a charioteer? The Tripura Upakhana tells us that psychological mind games were played by both sides. And if you don't have the Tripura Upakhana, then you lose a lot of that wonderful context that otherwise, this Upakhana is telling you. If And there are so many other characters and strong female characters in the Mahabharata that simply amaze you when you read the full Upakhyana, like Damayanti is so resourceful. And look at Savitri, she actually walks with none other than the god of death. And she ends up winning back her husband's life. I mean, Yam has to admit defeat in front of Savitri, and that is the character that we have in the Mahabharata, such a strong female character. It just boggles the mind.
The the title of the book and the what you're explaining now, I think readers will get benefited from a lot, because the kind of glorification of women which is done in Mahabharata is nowhere else in any Western literature ever. In fact, the women are regarded as a second-class citizen even till date today. Even today, in USA, the courts, people are filing petitions on women that they don't have rights for these things. That thing is going on, and so you can say, I mean, and that's what people are fighting. If you see in USA, most of you have USA. The idea is the big roads and infrastructure and well-managed government offices, but the reality on the ground is different, because once you are living in that society, you get used to these facilities. But then the real issues start coming in. That's where you start questioning. And then you start going back to Mahabharata and you get amazed that women and children have so much future. The future of the education system in Mahabharata was so advanced that at the age of 14, Arjun was considered a fully educated warrior, just the age of 14. After he was considered a full-fledged warrior, then Dronacharya came into his life after that. So, a lot of such instances are there. Thank you so much for, I really like people doing more research on Mahabharata. In fact, the Western authors have nothing else to research on their biblical mythology. After completing their biblical mythology studies, they start coming back to Mahabharata to find faults, to gain experience, knowledge, and include that back into the biblical mythology. You'll be shocked to know, many people don't know, that most of the Bible is still being written. It's not completed because it changes with time. And every 500 years, a new version of Bible is introduced. And that is added very silently to be called the New Testament, finally. Anyway, with that, I'll end this show. And if you have any questions or comments you would like to share, please do like the video, share the video, And Abhinavji, you like to say something about your book?
First of all, thank you for providing me with this online platform, wonderful platform, and its reach to talk about the Mahabharata, my favorite book. Uh, so my book is this one, completing Vyasa's Mahabharat, 67 Upakhyans, Upakathas for the modern reader. Three, four things about this book very briefly. So this is based on the Pune edition, the critical edition of the Mahabharata that was brought out by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. It's a retelling of these 67 upakhyanas that the scholar, as I said, Alpha Vital identified. It is based on the critical edition. It contains no distortions, misrepresentations, and all. For those interested, it contains about 1,000 footnotes. If you shloka references, character references, historical references, and other things. If you are interested in knowing more, and finally, it is written in a style that will appeal to the modern reader. So if you are used to reading thrillers, I'll go ahead and say that this is written. Some of the Upakyanas are written in the style of a modern thriller because, as I keep saying, that the Mahabharata is a Panchaved, it's a Puran, it's a Niti Shastra, it's a Dharma Shastra, but it's a Katha Sarit Sagar. But it is also, at the end of the day, I think, one of the greatest thrillers ever written. And I am paying my respects to the Mahabharata by retelling some of the Upakhyans in that manner. And I do hope this experiment is acceptable to readers.
Thank you so much. And please, is it available on Amazon or other place?
It is available online and in bookstores. Online, you can buy it from Amazon. The paperback is now available. I am told that by the publisher that the ebook version should come out in a couple of weeks or so. It is also available from Padhega India, so you can go and order the book from there. And yes,
Thank you so much. And viewers, there are a lot of exciting content on our channel in Hindi also. And you can check it out, and you can also like, share, and subscribe to our channel so that more and more people can get access to our channel. And I'm really thankful to everyone that is coming close to 100,000 subscribers, and it has already crossed 1.6 million views. So thank you so much, and namaste.